There comes a time in every man's journey where he has to reevaluate how he's making decisions. It comes down to the very first one that I've talked about in this podcast is if you want a result in your life you never had, then you need to start doing things you've never done. That question and statement helped me get to the place that I am today. But there's a certain point where you've grown so much that you need to rewire your decision-making process. And there's also a place where you've grown in one area that the other areas of your life may not be as strong as others. And so you're kind of biased to your decision-making. That is the topic of today's episode. I want to talk about how I'm making decisions right now because it's different than ever how I've made decisions in the past. I talked about it earlier in the week when I talked about how I made the decision to go to the gym or to switch gyms in this case. And I want to pull it back a little bit and let you know how I'm making decisions right now because maybe you're like me and you've been growing in a particular area, but you're not really sure how to evaluate these other areas that may be stagnant and they may need growth in them, but you're not really sure how to do it. Well, a couple things that I've been doing. First one, the more it doesn't make sense on paper, the more likely I do it. Because there's a certain point where you get to the point where you understand a lot of things, you have a lot of knowledge, and that can also create analysis paralysis. And so your brain wires your brain to look for, is it logical? If it's not logical, I don't go with it. And so in this case, I use that against me. That when I've literally set up you know what? Just like the gym, the math doesn't make sense on this. It's double the membership. I'm going to do it anyway. Because I realize that through all the decisions I'm making currently, the more that I go through all this process, the more I realize my decisions are biased. Now, in the beginning, it's almost easy because every decision is biased. But then when you get growing, like I said, only certain ones are biased because you get a really good muscle strength in one and you know how to execute that one. But then these other ones, the bias is unclear and you also have more information, so you overthink it and potentially don't do it. So, reviewing. One, I don't look for logic on paper. The less sense it makes on paper, the more likely I'm going to do it because the less instinct I'm using, the more likely it's going to change my life. I also still use fear like I've talked about regularly. The more something like, it's just kind of like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to feel that. Those are also where I'm going. 3, magnifying number 1. The more something looks crazy on paper, the more likely I'm going to do it. Because as I was just watching on Instagram, someone's story that said, not every idea is crazy, but every crazy idea was potentially $1 billion idea. If you think about any of the big ideas out there in today's world, at one point, they were crazy. Steve Jobs, the light bulb, even one that I just learned, and I think I talked about it. If I'm not, then this is the first time, that we put a man on the moon before we put wheels on a suitcase. Lots of crazy thoughts behind that one. Chew on that one for a minute. And so the crazier it looks, the more likely that I'm going to do it. The crazier it looks, the more likely I'm going to do it. Because what you have to realize, especially if you've been on, like I said, you've been on this growth path for a while, part of that decision-making process is you are more inherently biased with the knowledge you've accumulated. And your ego, your brain, is wired to keep the room temperature safe. So think of it like this. It has a bigger library to set up better excuses. It has more information to really write that essay on why you shouldn't be doing something, because it has all of this wisdom to pack into it. And then you look at it and it makes sense and you're like, hook, line, and sinker. I shouldn't do that. But meanwhile, your brain is kind of manipulating the knowledge that you've accumulated to prevent growth in certain areas. So the more something's crazy, the more that I do it. I've also framed it, the more I fear something, the more I do it as well. And I would almost argue that it's proportional as well, just like fear. I often say that the more something scares you on the other side is proportional. Like the feeling of fear, the greatness of it, how much tension you feel in your chest when you talk about it, that's proportional to the amount of extraordinary version of whatever is on the other side of that could change your life. the crazier it feels. Like, you know what? I should not just get on a plane and go to X, which, by the way, I'm doing this weekend and heading to Orlando to a men's retreat where I'm speaking. That initially sounded crazy. But the crazier their idea, the more likely they are to change your life. And so that's one of the other things that I've been looking at. And so when you get to a certain point, realize the knowledge sometimes becomes a curse. And it's also within that curse that keeps you stuck. And so look for less logic, less information, and craziness as you make your decisions going forward in 2022. Guys, that is all I have for you today. And we'll be back again on Monday.